has been happily married to Graham Wilson for 17 years. They have 5 children, one of whom, Claudia, is with her today.
Jennifer Wilson vit un mariage heureux avec son mari Graham Wilson depuis 17 ans. Ils ont 5 enfants et un d'entre eux, c'est Claudia qui est ici avec elle.
A graduate of McMaster University, Dr. Jennifer Wilson serves as a family and emergency physician in Uxbridge, Ontario.
Graduée du 2e cycle de l'Université McMaster, Dr. Jennifer Wilson sert comme médecin de famille et d'urgence à Uxbridge, en Ontario.
In 2007, she formed a unique partnership with a Ghanaian development agency.
En 2007, elle a formé un partenariat unique en son genre avec une agence de développement ghanéenne
to alleviate poverty and transform communities by providing medical, surgical, dental, and optical care for thousands of patients who have no access to health care.
Pour atténuer la pauvreté et transformer les communautés en offrant des soins médicaux, chirurgicaux, dentaires et optiques pour des milliers de patients qui n'ont pas accès aux soins de santé.
Next month, she will lead a group of 50 practitioners to Ghana for the 5th time in order to care for our global neighbors.
Le mois prochain, elle va diriger un groupe de 50 praticiens à Ghana pour la 5e fois dans le but d'offrir des soins de santé pour nos voisins globaux.
Please welcome Dr. Jennifer Wilson and her daughter Claudia.
Je vous demande d'accueillir chaleureusement Dr. Jennifer Wilson et sa fille Claudia.
Well, good morning to you all.
Good morning.
It is a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning as you gather for such a significant purpose. My heart has been moved already. And in fact, we have a saying when we're in Africa. In healthcare terms, we have a phrase TIA, which means transient ischemic attack. But in Africa, it stands for "This is Africa," meaning nothing goes right in Africa. So when your worship leader didn't make it this morning and the team came, I just felt right at home, because that's exactly how it is in Africa. Things don't go as planned, but when it comes to worship, it doesn't matter. Anyone can lead us, and you all sang so beautifully this morning. Well, before I begin, I would like to correct Jerry. A small correction to my little biography that he read. He said I have 5 children, but actually I have 6 children. And I'm not sure if we're going to get my PowerPoint up on the screen here. 2 of my kids are named Joshua. This is my first son, Joshua, my Canadian son, Joshua, and this is my African son, Joshua. So I'd like to begin by telling you a story of how I met my African son, and it was a story that took place on the road to Yara. One day, I was walking along a road in Ghana, a remote road, a dangerous road, the road to Yara. I saw something on that road. It was this baby, a baby named Joshua. I have to warn you, I do get a little emotional when I talk about this story. I'll be fine once I get through this. Joshua was half dead. He had been beaten by a bacteria called streptococcal pneumonia. He had been robbed of life-saving antibiotics because the local clinic didn't receive their monthly stock supplied to them by the Ministry of Health. A government official passed him by on the road. He went by on the other side, adding him to the statistic that 10 million children die each year before the age of 5 due to this condition, pneumonia, along with malaria and diarrhea. So too, a local soothsayer passed by on the other side when the family had no money to give him for a potion. Then a team of Canadian healthcare professionals came along. We saw him and took pity on him. We resuscitated him and put him in our vehicle, took him back to our compound to take care of him. The baby made a full recovery and left for his home in Yara with his parents, Peter and Lydia, 7 days later. Now, I thought that was the end of my story. But 6 months later, I received a letter in the mail from Joshua's father, Peter. They had no money, they had no gifts to thank our team for having come to Ghana to save his son. And so the only way he thought he could thank me was to write me this letter and declare that he was officially giving Joshua the name of my son. This is Joshua a year later. He's a thriving, beautiful toddler who actually now is just getting ready to start school in the village of Yara. Okay, back to my story. Who is my neighbor? Well, this was a question that I was forced to ask myself about 7 years ago when I heard Stephen Lewis give a keynote address at a conference for Ontario family physicians in Toronto. Stephen was the former United Nations Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa. And he told us statistics and he told us stories, but he concluded his address by saying that the situation in Africa is so desperate that even the most basic help would bring solace and hope to so many. And he asked us what we, a group of, I think there were about 2,000 or 3,000 family physicians in the audience, he asked us what we were going to do about this. So the exact focus of today, the question you are being asked today, was the question I was asked about 7 years ago. And as I wrestled with this question in response to Stephen Lewis's address, I found myself acting like that expert in the law that was read in the passage of the story of the Good Samaritan. I started trying to sort of justify myself and say to God, you know, surely God, you're not prompting me to consider the people in Africa to be my neighbors. Surely you are not asking me to take responsibility for the 10 million children like Joshua who die each year of pneumonia and malaria and diarrhea. At that moment, I actually had 5 kids under the age of 6, and I had a family practice, and I felt like my head was barely above water. So how could God possibly be asking me to think globally? Well, many of you know what happens when you get into those kind of conversations with God, right? So about 2 years later, I received an invitation, surprise, surprise, from a development organization in Ghana to consult with them on health care. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, this can't be happening. I had been wrestling with this question, who is my neighbor, for about 2 years. Well, this organization is called Northern Empowerment Association, and they partner very closely with the Canadian International Development Association, CEDA, here. And this organization is just doing an incredible job of providing holistic development programs to large areas of the rural north in Ghana. Well digging, sanitation programs, building schools, building churches, training pastors, peanut farming, fish ponds. I wish I could just talk to you for an hour about this development work. It's incredible. But they needed help with health care because it's so poor, it's so remote. Healthcare is really in its infancy in this area, and they really needed some input from Canada. And so, after wrestling with this question, who is my neighbor, for a couple of years, I accepted this invitation to go to Ghana and took along 25 of my, I'm just going to see if we can flip back to the PowerPoint there. Oh, wow, that's awesome. 25 of my friends. These are my friends from Uxbridge, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and we ran mobile medical clinics in 4 remote villages that year to a group of people who had never, ever seen a doctor. In fact, interestingly, there were certain words, like the word dentist wasn't even in their vocabulary yet in that dialect. So we discovered that year that many of our patients were suffering from hernias. Now, I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up if you've had hernia surgery, but I bet a whole bunch of you have. And hernia in Ghana is one of the leading causes of death. So in 2008, with our new neighbors on our heart, we returned with a team of 30. We built 2 operating theaters, and this time we brought along a team of surgeons from the United Kingdom who operated that year on about 100 hernias. On that trip, this year, we discovered that many of our new neighbors were suffering from dental pain. So then we returned the next year. This is our next team. Our numbers got bigger each year. There were 40 of us that year in 2009, and we brought along dentists with us. And for the first time, they had to create the word dentist in the local language. 2009, particularly in the village of Yara, where Joshua was from, we realized that vision was a huge problem. There wasn't one pair of eyeglasses in the entire village. Women were burning themselves on the cook fires. Men were cutting themselves with the machetes. They were losing their fingers farming because they couldn't see. We didn't even realize this for the first 3 years we went. So back we went last year. Our team grew again, and this time we took along some awesome optometrists, some eye care nurses, and about two 100-pound crates of used eyeglasses. So that brings us to today. A week from today, as a matter of fact, we are leaving with our 5th team, now 50 in number, medical, dental, eyes, surgery. We have built a 3rd operating theater, and the surgeons are hoping to operate on 250 hernias this year. Right now, not including the people who will be done this year, we have 700 people on our wait list for hernia surgeries. So I tell you all of this because this is what unfolded for me in my life since that challenge was given to me by Stephen Lewis to answer the question, who is my neighbor? So just as he challenged me, I challenge you to ask yourself this question, who is your neighbor? And I believe that Jesus answers this question so profoundly in the story of the road to Jericho and the people who travel along it. I really believe wholeheartedly that each one of us was created for a very specific purpose. I believe each one of us is on a path or a road that God desires for us. But the road is different for each of us, isn't it? We each have our own personalities, our own gifts, our own circumstances, and my path is very different than yours. My road led to Yara. I love to organize people and mobilize people. I was drawn to the practice of family and emergency medicine, and I have a very wonderful husband who can handle 5 kids when I take off every year for a couple of weeks. My best friends are pharmacists and nurses who are as passionate about this work as I am, and it makes sense that this is my road. This is my road leading to Yara, and my neighbors become those who I meet along the road. This next picture is one of my new neighbors, my good friend Chief Joseph, who is the chief of the Yara village. So I ask you, what road are you on? Are you on the exact road that God has designed for you? Or perhaps do you need to make a little mid-trip adjustment, like the GPS woman on my car says, recalculating route, recalculating route, recalculating route. So I challenge you to ask yourself this question. Who is my neighbor? Who is your neighbor? And are you on the right path toward meeting the needs that God has designed for you from the beginning of time? Now I think it's very important to note that there were 2 other people who passed by the sick man before the Samaritan got to him. Too often, the self-preserving non-involvement of the priest and the Levite represent you and I. And I'd like you to just ponder for a couple of moments 2 reasons why I believe we can be just like that priest or the Levite rather than the Samaritan. The first reason is I think we're just too busy. Let's face it, our lives are very full, we are tired, we are overextended, we are highly scheduled and structured. Most of us have very little margin in our life. And by margin, I mean the space between the load we carry and the limits that we have. Most of us don't get enough sleep. We barely manage with the 24 hours that we have been given. In fact, we always say, I wish there were more hours in the day. But add an unexpected neighbor who might need our help at the side of the road, and how could we possibly have time to fit that in? I really think we all need to pause and really think about this and ask ourselves what the Bible has to say about solitude, about rest, about the Sabbath, and about taking the time we need away from our busy schedules in order to give priority to these 2 greatest commandments that Claudia spoke of, loving God and loving our neighbor. Secondly, I believe that many of us are too distracted. Last week, I attended one of our medical staff meetings in Uxbridge, It started at 2 p.m. and I was 5 minutes early. I was walking down the hall and I thought, I must have the wrong room because I couldn't hear voices as I was approaching. As I went in the room, there were about 10 people in the room and no one was talking. Everyone was on their iPhone or their BlackBerry. Everyone. Now, usually this is a time where we chat, we catch up on each other's lives. In fact, I knew a couple of my colleagues were having major personal issues. No one was talking. I love the benefits of technology. I use it, I need it, but it can be so distracting, can't it? How will we see the neighbor along our path if our eyes are glued to our smartphones? Well, in my mind, the biggest difference between these two that passed and the Samaritan was compassion. And I'd really like us to remind ourselves that it's difficult to be compassionate when you're tired and you're overloaded, when you're burnt out or you're distracted. And if I could talk for a moment to our first responders and ask you guys how you feel when a call comes, like 45 minutes before the end of your shift. It is really hard to mount the compassion you need when you are just about ready to pack it up and go home, right? And you have to perform again. How hard that is to feel compassionate. Well, I'm embarrassed to tell you that even when I'm in Ghana, this happens to me, and I've caught myself being like the priest and the Levite. I'm tired, I'm hot, there's thousands of people yet to be seen, and I can miss the need that's right in front of my face. And I'll never forget the last day of our mission. In 2009, it was a day to pack up and debrief, prepare for home. We were meeting with our team and evaluating the success of this wonderful mission, and I received a message that there was a patient with a burn that needed to be seen. And I remember moaning. I know I moaned inwardly. I think I maybe even moaned outwardly. But we had just seen 7,000 people. I was so tired. I wanted to get home. I missed my kids. And you know that feeling when you just don't think you could help one more person? That's how I was feeling. And I remember grumbling on the way to where this burn patient was. And this is who the patient was, this next slide. It was a boy, an 8 to 10-year-old boy, who had 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his legs. He was covered in flies. The burn was a week or two old and his leg was already starting to contract, so he couldn't walk very well. And he had come from a village so remote to us that they had hired a motorbike to bring this boy. They traveled for 3 days on a motorbike and didn't quite make it to our last clinic, which was the day before. That's why they were late and came on this particular day. I came so close to being a Levite or a priest when it came to this boy. I almost didn't go and see him. I almost said, you know what, I gotta pack my bags and go home. Well, if we really want to understand this question, who is my neighbor, and if we want to be good neighbors, we must create more time and space in our lives, our busy lives, and we must be really careful not to be too distracted and exhausted to notice or to care. Otherwise, we too will be just like the two that passed on the road to Jericho. I'd like to conclude with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who often spoke about this parable of the Good Samaritan. He challenged people on a deeper level when he extended the call for neighborly assistance to society at large. And he said this: on one hand, we are all called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beat and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than just flinging a coin to a beggar. It's not haphazard, and it's not superficial. Well, in Africa, looking at the whole road to Yara is very challenging. It will be many, many years before sustainable health care will reach the region where I work. Until such a time, we will do our best to help and care for as many people as we can. We will look after their illnesses. We will operate on their hernias. We will pull their teeth that are sore and painful. We will provide eyeglasses to those who cannot see. But when I look at the bigger picture on this road, there are so many things that are beating up and robbing the men, women, and children along the way. I mentioned to you a couple of times malaria, pneumonia, and diarrhea are the big three. 10 million kids a year die of these things in Africa. Joshua certainly would have been one of them had we not been there that day. So I am really excited to share with you, as a result of these trips and our knowledge and our statistics, we're working really closely with CHRI, and we're just awaiting approval of 2 major grants, one of which is this next slide, is called the Leata project. It's a $650,000 project that will involve installing and monitoring insecticide-treated mosquito nets to every man, woman, and child in the 5 villages where we go every year, and to provide a mosquito net to pregnant women in almost 50 villages. This word Leata actually means rescue us. These are some of the things we are doing to look at that bigger picture, to look at the whole road. So the whole road to Jericho, the whole road to Yara, the whole road to wherever it is you are journeying to. This is the challenge I really want to leave you with today. You guys are a group of people who can not only help your neighbors who are wounded on the side of the road, but you're a group of people who can actually change that road to prevent them from being wounded and harmed again in the future. You are all leaders, you are emerging leaders, you are respected, you represent all segments of society, and together you could look at this whole road and understand it and analyze it, try to figure out why human beings are being beaten and robbed as they journey along life's highway. And together I really believe you can change that road, repair it, you can make it safer. You have the intelligence, you have the resources, you have the organizational capacity, and you are here in Ottawa, our nation's capital. So the scripture that was read today by Bill and by Claudia makes it very clear. For those of you in the room who are followers of Jesus Christ, there really are only 2 things that should guide our life. Loving God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and loving our neighbor. Who is our neighbor? Well, I believe our neighbor is the person that God places on our path as we pursue our God-given journey in this life. How do we be a good neighbor? Well, it's funny how Jesus really never answers that, does he? Directly, anyway. He just tells the story of the Good Samaritan and says at the end, go and do likewise. So let's go and do likewise. Let's go and make sure we are on the right road, the one that was designed for us individually before the beginning of time, the road to Jericho. Let's go and make sure we are not too busy or distracted to see the one lying on the side of the road needing our help. And then together, my strong prayer is that as a community of faith, we will lift our eyes up a little ahead and look at the bigger road, the whole road, each bend, each pothole, each source of danger that is harming the people around us. Crime, homelessness, poverty, global warming, war, pornography, illness, obesity, unemployment, substance abuse, mental illness, bullying. We could go on and on. And then don't forget about the global dangers like malaria, HIV, AIDS, unclean water, poverty. As a community of believers, may we be steadfast in our determination to collectively prevent our local and our global neighbors from being beaten and robbed by these things. And may we be steadfast in our determination to ensure that no man or child or woman in our communities and in our world has to suffer and die along the road. I can't but help wonder, after following the news this week of the young man who died here in your community, alongside him on his journey of life? Who came alongside him while he was suffering? And I can't help but wonder who is going to ensure that our society takes a long look at the issues surrounding his death before any more young lives are claimed. It's a mystery to me, why God would choose you and I to complete his work here on earth. I just don't get it. It's such a mystery to me that he would choose to use our hands and feet to be the hands and feet of Christ. But whether we understand it or not, it's true. And all I know is that in 2004 I came face to face with this question, who is my neighbor? And next Friday I'm leaving with my 5th team to go and meet the needs of my new neighbors. Our team will arrive to the gate of the compound of NEA, and these 3 flags will be flying side by side when we arrive, symbolizing the commitment on the part of Canada and the United Kingdom to visit and care for thousands of patients, thousands of neighbors, many of whom I now consider my friends, and one of whom is now considered to be my son. So in conclusion, I'd like to give you all a gift, because in Africa, when you meet new people, you always give them a gift. And my gift to you is 3 minutes of time. Uninterrupted time before the demands of your day begins, before your Blackberries and your iPhones tell you how many messages you missed in this last hour. I'd love you to take these 3 minutes and listen to the lyrics of this song and meet some of my neighbors on the road to CHRI. And as you do so, and as you leave this place today, may God bless you, each of you, as you continue your journey along this road. May God bless each of you as you serve this city and as you stop and care for your neighbors along the way. And may God bless each of you as you allow these 2 great commandments, the greatest commandments of all time, guide and direct each step you take wherever your road may lead you.